There exist certain interviews that seem to vanish from collective memory. Files are erased without a trace. Witnesses, once vocal, grow silent. And those who still recall what happened choose to keep their memories private, especially when the subject borders the intersection of advanced science and what many call the unexplainable. Stephen Hawking, a name that echoes through scientific history, is widely remembered not just as a physicist of rare genius, but also as a man who triumphed over severe physical limitations to expand humanity's understanding of the universe. He discussed phenomena as massive as black holes and as intricate as the origin of time itself. Yet there was always one subject he persistently avoided in his public discourses: the concept of what lies beyond death. In the early months of 2025, a team of digital historians combing through restricted university archives stumbled upon a peculiar discovery embedded in the depths of the University of Cambridge's private database. Among a cache of documents never meant for public consumption, they located an encrypted audio file. Its title, a meaningless string of symbols and letters. But embedded in the metadata was a chilling tag: Hawking, consciousness beyond. Initially, suspicion ran high. Could this be a forgery, some elaborate prank, or misrepresentation? But after detailed acoustic analysis, experts confirmed the voice was authentically Hawking's. The file, dated to the early 2000s, a period when Hawking had nearly ceased granting interviews, captured a dialogue between him and an anonymous interviewer whose voice had clearly been altered, either digitally processed or purposefully disguised. The first section of the recording delved into familiar territory: cosmology, gravitational mechanics, and the origin of space-time. But then the interviewer posed a question that abruptly altered the direction of the conversation. "Professor, if information inside black holes isn't lost, could it be possible that consciousness, too, endures beyond the death of the physical body?" A prolonged silence followed. Then came a quiet intake of breath. Hawking responded, "That is a question I have investigated far more extensively than I've ever admitted publicly." What followed was a soliloquy that would have been deemed radical, even unacceptable, by mainstream science. He spoke not only of matter and energy, but of thought, awareness, and memory as persistent informational constructs. According to Hawking, if information can never be truly destroyed, then this principle must extend beyond material objects. It must include the architecture of cognition itself: memories, perception, identity. What many religious doctrines refer to as the soul, he argued, might not be some spiritual entity, but instead a complex informational formation, a data structure governed by the laws of physics. The interviewer pressed further, "Are you suggesting that consciousness can continue after physical death?" Hawking's reply was uncharacteristically resolute. Yes, though not in the way religious traditions often describe it, in a different form. He explained that he had once drafted a theory positing that consciousness isn't confined to the brain. Instead, it behaves more like quantum information, dispersed across time and space. When the body ceases to operate, that information doesn't simply disappear, it transitions. Death, he said, is not an ending, it is a reconfiguration. These words starkly contradicted his well-known public position. For decades, Hawking had stated that human existence ends definitively at death, that there is no heaven or afterlife. Yet, here he was, entertaining and even validating an entirely alternate view in a confidential discussion. And that's where the truly unsettling discoveries began. As researchers delved deeper into the properties of the recording, they detected anomalies, inaudible signals embedded in the file. These weren't background noise, but appeared to be coded signatures, possible markers of data encryption or intentional masking. Audio forensics teams proposed that the recording had been either fragmented or shielded to obscure certain segments. Yet the most essential portion remained untouched. Hawking then revealed that he had been collaborating discreetly with a group of physicists and neurobiologists on a covert initiative dubbed the Cognitive Trace Program. Its purpose? To explore whether consciousness left measurable remnants following brain death. He described their use of experimental technologies, advanced neural interfaces, laser-based spectroscopic analysis, tools officially sanctioned only for research into memory retention. Yet, under the surface, they were employed for something far more audacious. The results were astonishing. In 2 of their experiments, something occurred that couldn't be dismissed as error. Following the clinical death of 2 patients, unexplained quantum phenomena, brief surges of structured activity, were detected in the lab environment. These could not be explained by known models of biological decay. "Are you describing something like a quantum echo?" the interviewer asked. "Yes," Hawking confirmed. "Memories, emotions, possibly even fragments of personality patterns, not in the conventional sense, but in forms capable of interfacing with the external world." This theory echoed but extended beyond Roger Penrose's hypotheses on quantum consciousness. Hawking now proposed that both black holes and minds obeyed the same informational laws. Nothing was lost, only reformulated. A black hole doesn't annihilate information, it converts it, and I believe consciousness undergoes a similar metamorphosis. It doesn't end, it assumes a new structure of reality. At this point, the recording included a long pause. Then the interviewer asked, almost hesitantly, "Is that what the soul is?" Hawking's voice, nearly inaudible, responded, stripped of religious symbols, "Yes, a quantum soul, an informational essence, not confined to the body, embedded in quantum reality." Suddenly, audio distortions interrupted the file. Glitches, static, an interference pattern. Perhaps accidental, perhaps not. Specialists later attempted to reconstruct the missing fragments using spectrum analysis. Some elements were restored. In the remaining segment, Hawking voiced a solemn warning. If the hypothesis of a cognitive trace after death were ever confirmed, the consequences would be seismic. Not only for science, but for philosophy, theology, politics. Such a revelation, he feared, could empower the few to manipulate belief or weaponize existential hope. "That is why," he said, "I withheld this work. Humanity may not yet be mature enough to face what this truly means." Then, with an abrupt click, the audio stopped. But the mystery didn't end there. Upon analyzing the file's metadata further, the team discovered a hidden set of geographical coordinates. Initially dismissed as random characters when input into a mapping system, the coordinates pointed to a facility just outside Geneva, a known satellite lab of CERN, Europe's famed particle physics institute. Public records claimed the base was used for magnetic systems testing. But off-the-record sources told a different story. In the early 2000s, a confidential research group had operated there under the guidance of Dr. Mark Euler, a physicist who had previously collaborated with Hawking. What the team discovered next only deepened the mystery. Within yet another declassified CERN document, a brief, technical report buried among logistical memos, was a curious mention of what appeared to be synchronized activity. It stated that on specific dates, clusters of children who had demonstrated signs of reincarnation-like memory simultaneously reported vivid dreams involving symbols, equations, and locations they had never encountered in waking life. These dreams, when compared across multiple regions, contained uncanny similarities, down to precise sequences of mathematical patterns. Dr. Harding and his team suspected these might be moments of what they began to call interference alignments, periods when the so-called cognitive trace fields could be activating or aligning across different carriers. The implications were staggering. If consciousness truly persisted as a form of non-local information, then these moments could represent not just echoes from a past existence, but flashes of an emergent collective intelligence forming across individuals. One child, a 9-year-old girl from Munich, began drawing diagrams that resembled early-stage quantum circuits, designs well beyond the curriculum of her age group or her school. Another, in Osaka, correctly identified elements from theoretical physics that had not been widely published outside of restricted academic papers. When interviewed, the children often couldn't explain where the knowledge came from. They would say simply, "It was always there," or "I remembered it in my sleep." As the data accumulated, Harding's team constructed what they tentatively called the resonance matrix, a theoretical framework for tracking these consciousness transmissions and memory spikes. At its heart was a controversial idea that certain neural structures, perhaps genetically or environmentally primed, acted like receivers, tuning into lingering fragments of consciousness in a shared quantum substratum. But the deeper they explored, the more resistance they encountered. Several team members received vague but insistent phone calls from anonymous sources. Some were threatened, others bribed. Servers holding encrypted data were remotely wiped in the middle of the night despite being air-gapped from any network. Even Harding himself was followed. It was becoming clear someone didn't want this information to come to light. Still, the team pressed forward. With help from sympathetic researchers across Europe and North America, they managed to secure a private server farm in Iceland, chosen for its legal protections and physical isolation. Here, they began to reconstruct what had been lost, and in doing so, uncovered something even more profound. A second set of coordinates embedded in the residual code from the Hawking audio file. These new coordinates pointed not to a scientific facility, but to a location in the Peruvian Andes, a region long associated with mystical traditions and oral histories that spoke of spirits, star beings, and soul passageways. It was a place where, according to local shamans, the sky opens inward. What they found atop the ridge, nestled between monolithic stone structures older than Machu Picchu, was a naturally occurring quartz cave. Within its depths, electromagnetic anomalies were measured, anomalies that matched those recorded during the so-called cognitive trace spikes. The local people believed it to be a gateway, a place where the soul passed between lifetimes. One elder even claimed, "The ones you speak of, the minds that return, they come through here." Was it possible, Harding asked himself, that ancient traditions had somehow intuited, or even interacted with, the very phenomena science was only now beginning to grasp? The resonance matrix began to shift from theory to something more like a map. The team identified 43 individuals across the globe whose patterns most closely matched the theoretical imprint of the consciousnesses observed in earlier quantum experiments. The data suggested something chilling and awe-inspiring. These weren't just reincarnated minds. They were part of a design. And then the encrypted file labeled Echo Protocol was discovered, locked inside a CERN backup system long thought defunct. It was the final piece of Hawking's legacy, and perhaps his most audacious claim, that consciousness was not merely a byproduct of the universe, but a tool within it, a mechanism for preserving, evolving, and transmitting the very fabric of intelligence across time. The file ended with a single phrase: "The universe remembers." The phrase echoed in Harding's mind for days. The universe remembers. It wasn't just poetic, it was a hypothesis encoded in metaphor. What if memory, in its deepest form, wasn't confined to neural architecture at all? What if the universe itself retained information, held impressions of thought, identity, and awareness, not unlike grooves in a phonograph record, waiting to be played again? The idea wasn't entirely alien. Quantum physicists had long debated the role of information in the structure of spacetime. Theories like the holographic principle hinted that the entire three-dimensional universe might be a projection from encoded data on a two-dimensional boundary. But what Hawking suggested, what Echo Protocol implied, was something even more radical. That consciousness used this structure, that life, death, and identity were not ends or beginnings, but transactions in an information economy more ancient than stars. In a sealed addendum to the Echo Protocol labeled Phase Lying, Stephen Hawking had sketched out a proposed experiment. It would use a modified interferometer integrated with entangled photon relays and an artificially induced decoherence field. The goal? To create a controlled environment where a subject near death or in deep hypnagogic state might generate a measurable, non-local consciousness signature. It was theoretical madness. And yet, with the data from the children, the resonance anomalies, and the quantum bleed signatures found in the Andes cave, Harding's team realized they could replicate it. They began building the apparatus in Iceland, quietly, under the radar. The prototype was called the Vessel. It wasn't large, about the size of an MRI machine, but it required a dense lattice of cryo-cooled fiber optics, shielding normally used in particle colliders, and a stable quantum clock system to synchronize photon emissions across entanglement channels. Finding a subject proved more difficult. Then came Alian M. Sato, a 17-year-old from Nepal whose EEG patterns during sleep mirrored those seen in the so-called carrier children. He had been reporting out-of-body episodes since age 6 and could recall, with uncanny detail, specific streets and events from a town in Austria he had never visited, right down to the storefront names that had changed during the 1990s. When brought to the vessel and eased into a state of guided hypnagogia, the instruments began to record something extraordinary. Micro-fluctuations in zero-point energy fields that were statistically indistinguishable from signal noise. Except for one thing. They repeated. Over a 24-hour period, the exact same fluctuation pattern occurred 6 times, always at 3:33 a.m., Coordinated Universal Time. No known environmental factor could account for it. And more curiously, embedded within the waveform was a fractal harmonic that matched the geometric layout of the Andes cave, down to the centimeter. The universe wasn't just remembering, it was responding. Elian awoke that evening and said only one thing. "It's not just one of me." The data confirmed it. Within the resonance matrix, new activity nodes began to light up. 13 individuals, all children in disparate parts of the world, manifesting simultaneous dreams, trance states, and inexplicable speech in languages they had no exposure to. Languages like Classical Sumerian, pre-dynastic Egyptian, archaic Sanskrit. It was as if the activation of the vessel had caused a ripple, not through space, but across a deeper strata of reality. And so Harding posed a final, terrifying question. Had they initiated contact, or had they simply awakened something that had always been waiting? The 13 children were called the Harmonics. Each had been located within days of Elian's session in the vessel. Their vitals fluctuated in exact synchrony, despite time zones, weather, and geographic distance. Their dreams, recorded through real-time EEG neural translation, began telling the same story. A city beneath no sky, walls carved with light, a language that sang itself into being. One child in Patagonia sketched a glyph that matched an ancient carving found in a submerged temple off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan. Another in Senegal recited, while asleep, a poetic invocation matching the cadence and structure of the Rig Veda, but in a dialect extinct for millennia. The children had never met, never spoken, yet something bound them now, as though their consciousness had been grafted into a greater architecture. Harding began to refer to it in his notes as the overmind. But not everyone was aligned. The DARPA-linked private contractor who had funded Phase 3 of the Vessel project, codenamed Black Laplace, began requesting deeper access. They wanted the children relocated, controlled, and most of all, repurposed. When Harding refused, several team members were reassigned or vanished entirely. One physicist, Dr. Annika Ramos, was found dead in her Geneva apartment, her laptop missing, her heart stopped mid-sentence during a voice message to Harding. "We're not building a communication device," she'd whispered. "We're building a gate." Stephen didn't misunderstand the math. We misunderstood the audience. Still, the team pressed on. Too much had been discovered to retreat. The next vessel session was prepared, this time with simultaneous entanglement of all 13 harmonics. The goal, to form a neural lattice across the globe, briefly synchronizing consciousness to a quantum substrate beyond the Planck barrier. The experiment was set for midnight GMT, but 2 hours before the ignition sequence, Elian vanished. CCTV footage showed him walking barefoot into a corridor and then disappearing mid-step. No flash, no portal, just gone. In the hours that followed, 4 of the other children collapsed into deep comas, their brainwave activity falling into an unprecedented pattern. Flatline EEG, but full synaptic firing. It made no medical sense. They weren't brain dead. They were, somehow, awake. In the scrambled hours that followed, Harding's team decoded a real-time feed emerging from the vessel's quantum relays. At first, it was indecipherable, a pulsating harmonic field across 6 dimensions, but embedded within was a sequence of primes, a signal. Translated and reconstructed, it revealed a topographic rendering. Not of any known geography, but of a massive construct, a Dyson-like lattice surrounding something at the edge of visibility. A negative void, a singularity, or a prison, and written across the lattice, looping like a warning or a prayer, in the phonetic signatures of all 13 languages spoken by the children. Memory is the anchor, dream is the door, return is inevitable. Then the feed went dark. The vessel shut down. And 33 minutes later, across the southern Indian Ocean, a seismic anomaly triggered deep beneath the floor of the sunken Kerguelen Plateau. Sensors registered a frequency not consistent with tectonic activity, but with modulated, artificially structured oscillations. Something was knocking. Harding stared at the last frame on his monitor. Elian's face emerging within the waveform noise, eyes closed, lips moving, whispering something. The software translated the phonemes. They're waking up. If this shook you, if you're questioning everything now, drop a comment and let us know what you think. Tag someone who needs to hear this. Share to keep the signal alive. This is just the beginning. Thank you for listening.